Welcome back to another episode of the Blockrunner Podcast. I'm your host, William, always here with your co-host, Iman.
What's going on, dude?
On the sticks, we got TJ.
Hello.
And finally, joining us today, we got Edan Yago, core contributor of Sovryn. Thank you for joining us, man.
My pleasure. Hello, guys.
It's good to meet you, man. Good to talk to you. I guess let's get started getting like your whole background story behind what it is you've been working on, because you guys are concentrated on something we've been talking about for a while now. So we're kind of like OGs in this Bitcoin developer space, but not really. I think people like you actually deserve that title. Who have actually been, we kind of like migrated here from the Ethereum developer space once things like ordinals and BRC20 started to kind of enter the conversation, right? We just kind of came in and got hooked on everything. But following us are a lot more people who, could be labeled as potential opportunists, whatever.
Yeah.
But there's other people who have actually been contributing towards this like Bitcoin development ecosystem space pre all these current day events, right? So you kind of like give us like a little bit of like your historical pathway of how you contributed to Bitcoin leading up to now, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So 13 or 14 years ago, so 2011, I was a neuroscientist working on machine learning.
Okay.
And I was reading papers in network science. And one day I came across this paper called the Satoshi White Paper. And I was sitting in the basement of Carnegie Mellon University, where I had started a little startup. And I was drinking my coffee. And by the time I had finished reading the Satoshi White Paper, I'd spilled my coffee all over my laptop. And with sticky fingers, I had emailed everyone I knew, telling them that they had to take a look at this. This was going to be the future. And I remember writing to them, one day this is going to be worth as much as $1 billion. So here we are, $1 trillion later. And I've been working in Bitcoin ever since. My sense is that it is an absolute revolution in terms of monetary policy, in terms of what we can do with the internet. It brings property rights to the internet. Before that, the internet was like 21st century technology with the political structure of the pharaohs. We have a few pharaohs who controlled all of the flow of information, all of the servers. Everyone else was a peasant. Now everyone gets to be an owner. We've got free commerce. We've got systems which provide governance, which go beyond the borders of any country. And we truly have 21st century technology for a 21st century society. So, I've been involved in a lot of things in Bitcoin. I started the first self-regulatory organization to try and lobby for Bitcoin, started one of the first remittance companies, sending money around the world in Bitcoin. And a few years ago, I became involved in a project called Sovryn. And Sovryn, our vision was that we would be able to build everything on Bitcoin, and that eventually everything would get built on Bitcoin. And maybe you can ask me later about what I think is the most important question in crypto, but I thought we had the answer.
Okay.
So Sovryn is an open source community building tools to expand what we can do with Bitcoin and make sure that people never have to use a centralized intermediary. And what has emerged out of this is the largest DeFi platform on Bitcoin over the last 3 years, with billions of dollars in trades, hundreds of millions lent, Bitcoin-backed stable coins, trading, margin trading, lending, DAOs, and not a single centralized party in sight.
How did the organization kind of originate? Like, was it just like what was the galvanization attempt? Who was the original actor, I guess, that would kind of propose that, we all need to band together and contribute this open source protocols, specifically what time did this all occur? Was it during the midst of when everything was already happening on, with Ethereum in regards to, the formalization of decentralized protocol governance, these DAO mechanisms? Because you said something different. Self-regulatory organization. That sounds like a DAO, but is it something different?
Well, that wasn't a DAO.
Okay.
That was sort of like a political lobby thing for Bitcoin. How did it start? It started because of the pandemic. So a bunch of us wanted to donate masks to places that needed them. Global supply chains had completely broken down. Hospitals weren't getting masks. And this wasn't just localized, it was everywhere. And the only way you could deal with a situation where the supply chains had broken down would be with a decentralized effort. And so we started building a network as part of a project we called Block 19. So Block COVID-19. We started building a network of people who could print or produce masks locally across the world: Argentina, Israel, Thailand, the US, Canada, Europe, everywhere. And we wanted to raise money to allow them to, continue to produce the masks and provide them locally. And so we wanted to raise this money in Bitcoin. And so we were trying to figure out, how can we sell NFTs for your donation on Bitcoin? And that was basically what started us down the path. We started looking at various Bitcoin technologies. One of the technologies that we looked at the time was a Bitcoin sidechain called Rootstock. And the same group of people sort of, we called ourselves the Distributed Collective. And out of the Distributed Collective, a few devs started building a DEX later during that year. And ultimately, that became the core of what eventually became Sovryn.
Wow. That is a very interesting origin story.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Something out of a pandemic, but it makes sense. Like something like that disrupts so much, like of our societal fabric, something of technical importance, where we can find different ways to band together to create public initiatives to support other human beings. That's music to our ears, because man, we've been in this deeply ingrained in a lot of what's been happening in this the last year of ordinals. I mean, it started off very organic, very I think good intentions, but it's been kind of co-opted in a sense from our perspective. It's becoming very muddied by I don't know, potentially nefarious actors. I don't know. It just doesn't have the same look and feel as it did a year ago, right? And hearing a story like that is, again, like an origin story that's very organic with good intentions in mind. Those are the things that we've been desperately looking for, right? Some sort of glimmers of hope in all of this. So,
did you know that we're more than just a YouTube channel? We also built Mscribe, the first inscription platform built from the ground up for the metaverse on Bitcoin. Connect your bitmap ordinals and use our tools to bring your community into the virtual realm. Support us by joining the movement at mscribe.io. Like, comment, and subscribe for the latest alpha. Back to the video.
It's good to know that that's the background for your ecosystem. So if you can just kind of explain Sovryn, because you mentioned Rootstock, that is the sidechain environment that enables Sovryn to exist, right? So if you can break down the actual components of this ecosystem for us.
Well, maybe I have to take a step back, right? So ultimately, what really tied people from Sovryn together has been the belief that we can go back to Bitcoin's roots, right? The early days of Bitcoin were full of innovation, were full of excitement. There was a sense of courage around what we can do to change and improve the world, and everything was invented there. Manny Rosenfeld came up with the idea for proof of stake. Gregory Maxwell had ideas around using ZK proofs. There was DNS before there was ETH DNS. There was like a Bitcoin DNS. All of the ideas, NFTs, were invented back in that early period, and it was an extremely, extremely exciting time. But over time, what happened was that people, there was in the beginning, Satoshi created Bitcoin. And from that very moment, instead of looking upon his work and saying it is good, he and everyone else in the Bitcoin community have been debating one central question, which is, how can you have decentralization at the same time as scalability and I really hate that Zoom does this, and expressivity, right? Smart contracts. And this is like a trilemma where if you do one it comes at the expense of the other two.
Yeah.
And so over the years, eventually the Bitcoin community sort of became frustrated with this trilemma. They started to see other efforts like Ethereum, who were more willing to sacrifice scalability and decentralization, or other projects do, things like that. And so Bitcoin became the decentralized, secure, reliable chain, and compromised on the other things. And at some point, people in the Bitcoin ecosystem, sort of to explain this to themselves emotionally, or people who we call it maxis, started to say, well, actually, all of these other things, scalability, smart contracts, they're actually not even valuable, right? That was sort of an emotional way for them to make peace with it.
Mm-hmm.
What bound the people in Sovryn together, and still does, was the belief that this trilemma can be defeated. Just as Satoshi had defeated the idea that you can't have decentralized systems at all, you can't have digital property. We can take that idea further, and we can defeat the trilemma and bring scalability and smart contracts and basically everything to Bitcoin. So we didn't lose. We had the childlike wonder, but we had more than just childlike wonder. We had grim determination that went with it to bring these technologies to life. And so we were willing to push the edges of what Bitcoin was capable of. And our ultimate goal was a belief that we would be able to bring rollups to Bitcoin. And so we started with DeFi because that was what we could, that was the most urgent need, right? Especially, and that turned out to be really prescient because after we started building lending and trading, FTX went down, Celsius went down, BlockFi took everyone's money. All of these lenders took everyone's money. People who were using Sovryn didn't suffer, right? So the most urgent need was to build DeFi. But then on top of this DeFi, with the community, with the funds raised, with the traction built by that, our ambitions, continued. And so now we're on the path to bring rollups to Bitcoin, which will allow for basically everything, right? The ability to do smart contracts in any language on Bitcoin with Bitcoin security to scale Bitcoin transactions potentially infinitely. And this is what we expect to be delivering over the course of, at least big chunks of this will be delivered over the course of the coming year.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you're leveraging Rootstock and that infrastructure?
Sure. So Rootstock is a side chain. And what that means is it's a chain that sort of is a sister chain to Bitcoin, which shares a lot of Bitcoin security. So the base asset is Bitcoin. It's merge mined with Bitcoin. And it's EVM compatible. So that means that you can build Ethereum-like smart contracts on it. It means that you can use MetaMask on it. It means that you can create an environment which is, to anyone who's used Ethereum, would be extremely familiar. And so that was a technology that existed. No one was really using it. Sovryn helped to pioneer that, and now a number of other projects use it as well. And it became sort of the largest part of the Bitcoin ecosystem outside of Bitcoin itself. That said, I think that a Rootstock and every other sidechain, that includes Stacks, it includes Liquid, it includes some that haven't even launched yet, I think in practice, unless they're able to upgrade themselves to rollups, they're going to prove to be obsolete chains, because the technology itself, with the introduction of Bitcoin rollups, is rapidly becoming obsolete. We don't need to accept the sacrifices of sidechains, which basically have their own consensus mechanism, their own security. They have trusted bridges. We are very, very close to a place where with Bitcoin, we no longer need to accept those compromises.
So your plan is to essentially migrate everything once you roll out your rollups for Sovryn, right? Like this is its own sidechain environment independent of Rootstock once you have implemented this, or is...
Well, ideally, so one of the projects that is sort of emerging out of Sovryn is Bitcoin OS. And Bitcoin OS is an effort to bring the capability of rollups to Bitcoin in such a way that the security of Bitcoin is maintained throughout and the whole system is interoperable. So the whole thing feels like just one chain. And so you'd have many, many rollups. These are like special execution environments where you can do anything with the security of Bitcoin, but like you could be on a privacy-focused environment, a privacy-focused rollup. Your funds would be there, but you would be interacting with a dApp on like a DeFi rollup. So you'd get the privacy of the private rollup. You'd get the DeFi of the DeFi rollup, and you get the security of Bitcoin, and it would all be composable. So our ultimate goal is not to abandon rootstock or other systems that have been built on Bitcoin, but to upgrade them so that they can be part of this.
So can you explain a little bit how this rollup gets injected into Bitcoin? Is it through, like, where do you store this rollup data? Is it hashed, or how does it work?
So there's two components. There's the transaction data, as you mentioned, and then there's a proof, a validity proof, or a snark. So this is like the zero knowledge component. In both cases, what we do is we take an aggregated, compressed version of the data, and that compressed data gets written to Bitcoin. And then the snark compresses the state, and the state changes and provides a proof of the state changes to Bitcoin. And so we construct a hub where multiple different rollups are able to provide their information. This all gets compressed together. So it makes the ability to utilize the very expensive security of Bitcoin much cheaper for any given rollup, because they get to share that expense with all of the other rollups. And then basically all of their transactions get compressed into these aggregated, condensed transactions and written as a Bitcoin transaction. So you get the security of a Bitcoin transaction because your transaction is a Bitcoin transaction. It gets written to Bitcoin, but it gets written to Bitcoin together with a lot of other people's transactions. And so it's kind of like we're bringing public transportation to Bitcoin, right? Up until now, everyone has to sort of get their own car, drive around. The Bitcoin highways are clogged. We're bringing, the bus. Everyone can get on a bus, much cheaper. And take advantage of Bitcoin in that way. And I expect that over the coming year, with the introduction of more ordinals, with runes, with rollups that come to Bitcoin transactions are going to become extremely expensive. Bitcoin transactions up until now have been very, very cheap. In fact, a year ago, they were one of the cheapest types of transaction that you could make in the entire crypto space. Now, that's not so much the case. A year from now, Bitcoin block space will be the most precious and scarce compute asset in the world. And everyone ultimately is going to want to be using scaling systems, rollups, in order to interact and transact on Bitcoin.
So to leverage the scalability of Sovryn, is there some bridging mechanism that needs to be leveraged?
Yes, you have to have the ability to move BTC as well as other assets, because Bitcoin is getting more and more native assets. Into the different rollup environments and back, and between the different rollup environments, with very few security compromises, right? You don't want to use a multi-sig. You don't want to use a federated peg. You don't want to use a centralized player like WBTC. You want to be able to be moving funds in such a way that you would be comfortable keeping your funds in these rollups in cold storage. That's the level of security that you want to have. And so what we're introducing is a system which has a one of n security assumption. And what that means is we create Bitcoin transactions. Now, these are not they look like regular Bitcoin transactions, but they utilize Taproot and snarks in a way that was first described by Robin Linus in the BitVM paper just a few months ago. Mm-hmm. So we're adapting some of that thinking and introducing the ability to have a system where you have multiple people who are writing snarks and verifying snarks from of these transactions between main chain and rollups. And as long as just one of them is an honest participant, the system maintains Bitcoin level security, maintains its integrity. So, you could have hundreds of participants, and if, let's say you had like 200 participants and 199 of them were compromised, they were all agents of, I don't know, the Illuminati.
Yeah.
So long as one of them, and that one could be you, mm-hmm. is not, even with all of their mass, they wouldn't be able to compromise the system. Mm-hmm. That's a very powerful asymmetry when it comes to security. And it's basically as close to trustless as you can get. So we call it near trustlessness.
So how do you determine the authenticity of 199 participants being malicious versus one being not malicious? Like, how do you make that technical determination?
That's a great question, and that's the beauty of cryptography and maths, right? So cryptography and maths are asymmetric, mm-hmm. and that's where the power comes from. So if you think about just a simple Bitcoin transaction, right? You've got a Bitcoin address, right? And you can send funds from that Bitcoin address, but no one else can. Why? Everyone can see your address. Sure. Why are you the only one who can sign transactions for it? And it's because of the asymmetry of the hash, right? The asymmetry of the cryptography. Everyone can see the output, right? A signed transaction, mm-hmm. your public address, mm-hmm. but no one can see the input. And only the person with the right input can put the right number into the hash and prove the correct output. And the same concept is used in Bitcoin mining, right? You need thousands of miners to sort of be mining all the time, just putting in random numbers in the hopes that one of those random numbers will be correct. Mm-hmm. So what zero knowledge proofs do, what snarks do, is the same thing, right? So you have this proof of what actually happened on Bitcoin. You have a proof of what actually happened on the rollups, and you turn it into a snark and you publish that to Bitcoin. Now, 1 million people can lie about it, but one person can say, "Here, I have a asymmetric proof that this is actually what happened." Mm-hmm. Right? This transaction is allowed, that transaction is not. And so it doesn't matter how many people are trying to defeat the system, so long as the power of asymmetry is on your side.
Yeah, it's basically like trying to manipulate transactions on Bitcoin by just modifying your own blockchain when you have to share that same data with everybody else and everyone else is disagreeing with you.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. I can come to you guys with a great deal of persuasion and a lot of money, and I can say to you, 2 + 2 is 5. Right. Right. But a 4-year-old can just do like 2 + 2, right? And everyone can see, celebrate the fact that 2 + 2 is 4, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just an asymmetric, hard truth.
Right. So then, what's your perspective on all these L2s that are spawning on Bitcoin as of late? Is it bandwagoners trying to take advantage of the narrative, or do you see a lot of genuine contribution here?
I think it's a sign. So I think most of them, not all of them, there's some really good genuine teams and genuine projects, but a lot of this is like affinity, scams, or people looking to take advantage of the narrative. What's interesting about it, though, is that usually the people who do that have a really good nose for what is going to be the next big narrative. And this is what they've identified. And I think they're right, because I mentioned earlier, having an answer to the biggest question in crypto. So what do I think is the biggest question in crypto? I think the central question, for at least for investors, but really for all of us in crypto, is when does crypto have a phase shift from fragmentation to consolidation? So every single immature industry goes through a phase of fragmentation. At the beginning, there were 150 car companies in the US. There were 75 companies making planes. There were, a million hobby shops that made personal computers. And then in the end, you're left with Ford and GM. You're left with Boeing and Lockheed. You're left with Apple and IBM and maybe HP, right? There's in every sort of industry that develops, you go from fragmentation to consolidation. But this is particularly true for industries that have strong network effects. And nothing has stronger network effects than crypto. The blockchain is a network, money is a network, liquidity is a network. All of these things are just network effects piled on network effects. And so what you would expect in an industry where there are network effects is that you would ultimately see consolidation down to just one dominant player. Mm-hmm. We haven't been seeing that yet in crypto. And I think the reason we're not seeing it yet is because up until now, the absolute dominant player has been Bitcoin consistently. But Bitcoin has also been the most limited player. It's been the player that has been least able to grow and scale its network effects to sort of dominate the space. Now that is changing. So why is that the most important question? Like, when is that phase shift going to happen? Because the phase shift is inevitable. A lot of people talk about, us always existing in a multi-chain world. I would challenge them to demonstrate one sort of historical analogy for that ever happening. That's not going to happen. We're definitely going to shift into consolidation. The losers will die. The winners will win big. Why is that such an important question? It's because that changes the very nature of how you invest or where you put your funds or what is secure.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that we are at the beginning. This cycle is the first cycle where we're starting to enter that phase shift from fragmentation to consolidation, from everyone trying a million different experiments in a million different places to those experiments maturing and reaching their potential on a very small and ultimately basically one chain. And that chain is going to be Bitcoin. And the reason that's going to start happening now is because Bitcoin is finally getting the capabilities to do both smart contracts and scaling while maintaining its decentralization, while maintaining its reliability. So it's basically the 900-pound gorilla has entered the chat. And people are recognizing that as a very, very significant moment. They recognize that that is going to be the theme of this cycle and of the next cycle. Wow. Yeah. And they're trying to position themselves for it.
So TJ, you're in absolute shambles. So the meme of Ethereum was a test net is like an actuality, potentially. Like everything we've seen up until now. Mm-hmm. We're just test environments to figure out how do we innovate and develop some sort of native to Bitcoin technology layer so we can kind of, expand its functionality the way you're describing it.
Would you agree with that?
Well, one of the founders, and probably the most important technical founder of Sovryn, wrote what she called the Sovereign's Manifesto on Bitcoin Talk back in 2020. And one of the key things she wrote, and I think she's probably more than anyone else responsible for this line, is that Ethereum is a testnet for Bitcoin. So yes, I would agree with that.
It's heartbroken.
Sorry, TJ. He's an ETH maxi, our producer here. But that's interesting. That's almost like I don't even know how to label that. I wouldn't want to say a declaration of war because that's kind of negative.
Well, it's a declaration of consolidation, basically.
Okay, that sounds so much better.
Yeah, safer.
Yeah, we're not gonna deeply enroot into the human tribalism aspect. Hopefully not.
Right.
Because if you're correct in your assumption, then yeah, people have a lot at stake to lose essentially in being on the wrong side of that equation, right? If that becomes the inevitable outcome.
So Edan, do you?
Yeah, well,
Well, one kind of follow up question: Do you believe like it's happening now because of the latest update Taproot in December 2021?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that the inflection point for this capability?
Yes. People thought that Taproot would be very powerful, and then Taproot was introduced, and then exactly nothing happened.
Yeah.
And that was because Taproot was really complicated, and it took developers a long time to figure out how to begin to use it. But if you look at what's been happening over the last year has been just a voyage of discovery. Like, people are really starting to figure out ordinals is from Taproot, BRC20 is from Taproot, runes is from Taproot, rollups and BVM and Bitsnarks. All of this stuff is the result of Taproot. Taproot is just an extremely powerful upgrade to Bitcoin, and it's taken us a while to figure out how to use it, but that is starting to rapidly materialize.
So just so that everybody understands, kind of like a metaphor for Taproot, would you say like something like ordinals is an application on Taproot where you could come up with, I guess follow-up applications on top of ordinals, but you can come up with your own version of an application that leverages Taproot, but not necessarily an ordinal implementation?
Oh, ordinals is just the simplest and earliest example. If you think about ETH, like basically, if you want to know what's going to happen to Bitcoin, just think ETH 2015 on steroids, right? CryptoKitties is ordinals. Runes is ERC20s. What comes next is smart contracts, ICOs, DAOs, the whole thing.
But
right?
We're
basically going to
all that stuff is on ordinals.
Ethereum.
All that stuff is on ordinals, though, right? All that stuff that you mentioned, like crypto.
No.
Okay.
No. It's using Taproot.
I see.
Ordinals uses Taproot, but it's not using ordinals, right?
Okay.
So each of these is a different sort of branch of the same tree.
I see. Okay.
Or, if you will, come from the same Taproot.
Very properly named.
I like the puns.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting vision of how all this is going to roll. Because you're right, that's definitely in contention with a lot of like the Web3 ethos. I remember when we interviewed Andreas Antonopoulos like 4 years ago. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And one of the more profound statements he had, predictions back in those days, was like, what was it?
One network.
One network, many chains.
Correct.
And we're like, oh shit, I think he's right. You know?
Yeah.
But, and then here you come. It's like, no. We're all coming. It's all going to kind of migrate back to the God chain.
Which makes sense.
I would totally agree. By the way, with Andres, it's one network, many chains. So each rollup is going to be its own chain. It's just that these chains, we tend to think about chains as having their own consensus mechanism,
right,
and having their own token.
Okay.
There's going to be 1 billion tokens, and each of these rollups will probably have their own tokens, but they will all ultimately utilize Bitcoin as their base asset, and they're going to use Bitcoin proof of work as their security and an ultimate consensus mechanism. They may have an intermediary consensus mechanism, but it will collapse down to the high court of Bitcoin. So it's going to be one single network, Bitcoin OS, many chains.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like this because ultimately this is the sustainability factor of Bitcoin past 2140, right? After that point, we need some sort of mechanism where we have a high velocity of transactions happening on Bitcoin to sustain the security and to increase it. And so I think this is the mechanism to do that. If not this, then we don't have anything, right?
Yeah. So
it's going to happen faster than anyone thinks. It's infinity over 21 million coins, but it's infinite data over 8 megabytes. Yeah. Right? Those 8 megabytes every 10 minutes, that's going to become the most scarce computing resource in the world by far. If you could buy Bitcoin block space, that would be the best investment you could make in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, like futures contracts of block space.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's continue on here. So we have a question here. Explain how side chains to Bitcoin are inheriting the security. So we talked about how we were leveraging a lot of these like multi-chain infrastructure and all these rollups. So do you see all these like rollups happening through like what is your outlook on like people leveraging Bitcoin? Is it going to be institutional based? Is it going to be countries like leveraging the final asset of Bitcoin and everyone else is using these side chains? And like, what's the ultimate kind of representation of Bitcoin in terms of like its base asset?
Well, first of all, I think the base asset is going to remain BTC. The Bitcoin, what we call Bitcoin chain, is going to be the central chain of this network and will be used for settlement. It will be the ultimate authority for which transactions occurred, the ultimate registry for assets, and it will be the settlement chain through which people interact. But the vast majority of individual transactions will be bundled with multiple other transactions. It doesn't matter if you're an institution or an individual, this is the way you will transact on Bitcoin. You will bundle your transactions with those of many others, and they will get written together to Bitcoin. It's just much more powerful, much cheaper that way. And so the way that people will think about Bitcoin, right? That you've got this asset and you've got this network. This is why we use the term Bitcoin OS. Bitcoin will be an operating system for the world. All the most important data, all the most important compute, all the most important sort of ledger of events, assets, all of that is going to ultimately end up on Bitcoin. And will be transacted in these different environments that roll up to Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I think in terms of Bitcoin price in this like mature ecosystem, let's say 100 years from now, where most of the population on the planet is leveraging this Bitcoin operating system and using these like side chains. How do you see like the actual underlying asset being as expensive as we expect it to be under this use case? How do you reconcile the expensive asset which you need in order to perform these like ultimate rollups onto Bitcoin? Are we basically going to be leveraging like a single Satoshi to like complete a transaction, which represents, let's say, 100,000 transactions that's rolled up into Bitcoin? Is that like how ultimately it's going to roll out?
I mean, yes, on Bitcoin main chain, it will continue to be Bitcoin that is used to pay for things, and transactions will cost as many Satoshis as they cost. And there'll be some competition over block space. But for most people, there's going to be, I don't believe that Bitcoin is going to be the only asset. I think that's a ridiculous belief. You can't have an economy with just one asset. It's like, what are people going to trade? Rice for rice? Right. So there's going to be a lot of assets. There'll be Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. This will be very popular, right? They will be tied maybe to national currencies. They'll be tied to inflationary measures. They'll be tied to commodities. There's going to be equity-like assets. There'll be DAO tokens. There'll be meme tokens. There'll be all of the things that we've seen plus. And these will live in the Bitcoin OS ecosystem. Ultimately, you will need Bitcoin to transact them, but you as the user won't even need that. If you're on a rollup, that pays with Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, it's only sort of at the end when it gets written to Bitcoin and aggregated that BTC is going to be used.
I see.
So think of, again, maybe going back, think of as BTC as the root asset, and all of these other assets sort of growing off of it.
Can you go a little bit deeper into the DeFi activities? We interviewed someone from Beanstalk that really shined the light on the value of stablecoins. And basically, to sum up the conversation, they said that it is the result of like a stablecoin like the fiat dollar that has enabled the last 100 years of progress, of human progress. And because of that stablecoin,
That's absolutely not true.
You don't think? Okay. What's your take? What's your take on that? Yeah, what's your take?
I mean, look, having stable assets is extremely important. But stable assets are not a product of the last 100 years. They've been around for a long time. In fact, the US had a more stable dollar in the 1800s than it did have in the 1900s, and had a more stable economy when it was on the gold standard than when it wasn't on the gold standard. Higher growth rates, right? If you think about the growth in the United States economy during the 1800s, it looked like China's. It didn't look like 2% a year. It was 4% a year, 5% a year, 7% a year. People, that was America's golden age. That golden age essentially ended in 1970s when the US went off the gold standard in its last iteration. So stability is important. Nobody's going to want to, Bitcoin is going to be a commodity money. And as a commodity money, it will have an overall trajectory of increasing in value over time forever. But high volatility in short periods of time. And over short periods of time is when most people are transacting and when most people have their savings. And most people can't stomach very significant volatility in the asset. So people are going to want a stablecoin. And if you think about sort of how is stability created back in the 1800s in the US, in Scotland, in England, banks would issue notes, right? And this note was redeemable. Well, it didn't say "in God we trust," it said "in gold we trust." You would be able to redeem it for a specific amount of gold, an ounce, for example.
Yeah.
The reason the British pound is called the pound is because it was redeemable for a pound of silver. And that's what people were transacting in. Not in the actual commodity money, which is difficult to transport, volatile, et cetera, et cetera. So people are not going to be transacting directly in Bitcoin. People will use Bitcoin as a form of long-term savings. The way I think we should think about Bitcoin is as a house, right? Every generation has one big economic decision that they need to make. For our grandparents, this generation was get a college degree. You could make a lot of mistakes in life. So long as you had a college degree, you were fine. For our parents' generation, it was buy a house early. You could make a lot of mistakes in life, but so long as you kept it to your house, you were a millionaire by the time you retired. For our generation, it's just Bitcoin. And you need to think about Bitcoin like a college degree or like a house. It's not something you trade in and out of. It's not something that you look at the price of daily or even annually. It's just something that sits there for basically until you retire or until your kids retire. And then every other mistake that you make in life gets taken care of.
Interesting. That really paints the picture of the importance of why DeFi is so important. Because if it is like an asset class that needs to be that, I guess, untapped, or at least like like a store of value.
Yeah,
right? Like,
underpins.
As gold is, right? Then we need to be able to leverage that in a sensible, I guess, monetary system that we can actually create real markets out of, right? So this is a big deal. This is obviously something core to what made Ethereum so interesting last cycle.
Yeah.
And definitely going to be one of the major, I think, attention points to this upcoming cycle. Right now, everything is kind of pinning on runes. All attention on runes. In a couple of days, this thing is like going to be a reality, right? So we're going to finally see what Casey Rotner's like baby spawns.
Well,
right?
I think Sovryn is likely to turn out to be one of the main places people trade runes, and then ultimately use runes for other things as well. And to try and get people into runes, we are actually in the middle in collaboration with a project that is also working on becoming like a Bitcoin rollup called Bob Build on Bitcoin. We're working on a runes giveaway. So you can go check out Sovryn. I think it's gobob.sovryn.app. And there's a way to pick up some free runes there.
Oh, that's awesome. So going back to the liquidity provision on this sidechain, how do you plan to harness or attract attention to this to this sidechain so that people can come up with the technology to facilitate a stable coin and other DeFi protocols?
I don't think it's going to be that hard. There's not a lot of times where entirely new markets, which are huge, open up. And when they do, people rush in. It's like this massive vacuum, and you hear this giant sucking sound because money and nature abhor a vacuum. Yeah. So it's like China opening up to the world, right? There's 1 billion people who were living under communism and were highly educated, and suddenly you could trade with. Right? Giant sucking sound. Yeah. Bitcoin, $1 trillion asset, largest user base, biggest brand. You just take something small like ordinals, and you drop it on Bitcoin, and it becomes overnight the largest NFT market with the most valuable NFTs in the world. Right? So the gravity of Bitcoin hasn't changed. It's just that people weren't able to take advantage of it. Now they can. Yeah. I'll just say this, today Solana has, high-speed transactions and meme coins and DAOs and DeFi and smart contracts. And Ethereum has rollups and smart contracts and DeFi and an ecosystem of projects, etc., etc. But you take Solana and you take Ethereum, and you take all of the tokens and all of the projects that are built on top of them together, and they're still smaller than Bitcoin.
Yes.
Without any of those things. So what is Bitcoin with all of those things going to look like?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's been like our thesis from the beginning. Like when there wasn't enough market evidence to kind of support it, right? It seemed like a no-brainer to us back in February of last year. Like, this is something that we need to kind of like cement our understanding and positioning in before like the market kind of arrives, right? And we spent the last year doing that, and because of that, we have great insight into like what is actually possible, what the L1 ecosystem looks like, and now people like you who are introducing like L2 capabilities, which of these actually make sense and which of them seem like potential nefarious actors, or I don't know the word for it. It's just you've identified some critical points that I think the user base needs to be made aware of, right? Like things like multi-sig bridging or custodianship stuff, things like this that I think the average user has no idea of the potential dangers of that. So I guess a question to ask you is, I don't know. So we're gonna have buckets of people building real infrastructure for layer 2s and side chains like yourself that are aware of these dangers and are building in consideration of all that. And then the other bucket of they're probably aware of it, but they're like, fuck it. We're going to deploy what we can anyways, just to rush the liquidity into our space and get this casino activity going, essentially. Right? So what is like hopefully it's not like an actual bad event. It probably will be though. Like, what do you think is going to be that new inflection point for people to understand who should we trust and who should we not in this space?
I don't know. That I can't predict. That's just going to be one's going to make really big promises, and people are going to pile in, and it's going to blow up in everyone's face. I can't tell you who the main character of the cycle is. What I can say is you have to do your own research. That's always been true. You have to remember that Bitcoin is something that is there to fix your mistakes, not to be one of your mistakes, right? So yes, put your Bitcoin to work, but be careful when you're doing it. Remember, it's something that you want to hold on to for 20 years. Yeah. You're going to make a lot of silly mistakes. You're going to marry the wrong person. You're going to buy the wrong car. You're going to invest in the wrong meme coin, and you're going to buy a stupid NFT. But if you have Bitcoin, none of that will matter in the end. And then the other thing is, there are people out there. I think, I could try and identify a few, but like Eric Wall is one of them. Jameson Lopp is another. I think I have a reputation for having extremely low tolerance for bullshit. And so we try to educate people. And if you guys ever have the question and just want to call me up for 2 minutes to ask me about a specific project, I'll give you my best no bullshit assessment.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, because that's what we try to do. We try to figure out like what is bullshit and what is not. And a lot of times during a bull cycle, all we see is bullshit.
Yeah, because people are deploying those sucking machines. You just kind of like so perfectly
liquidity extractors.
Those vacuums are they're everywhere, right? And because of that, because of our presence, right? We have an educational platform. People, they come to us. They want us to be like the ones, like, you know, turning off that vacuum is like, dude, that one, don't even get near it. You can get sucked into a trap, right? So we're desperately trying to understand the technology at its roots, at its core, to know like which are the, you know, the actual contributors to the longevity of Bitcoin, not just the ones that are going to be here for this cycle.
Because ultimately,
I think a really good place to start, really, like one heuristic that pretty much anyone can use, is who has been here for a while.
Oh yeah.
Who's been building
100%.
for a while?
Yeah.
Right. Who's delivered stuff already? Mm-hmm. Because if you the fly by nights, they popped out of the ground like a mushroom yesterday. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm sure everyone can think about a bunch of projects that they've never heard about before a month ago, with people at the helm that are either anon or they've never heard about until a month ago, where there's suddenly a lot of influencers talking about it, or there's marketing, or there's big promises. But what have they actually delivered so far? Where were they in the bear market? And where were they in the bear market before that, and the bear market before that? And what were they doing? Yeah. That you don't have to be technical to figure that out. It's not even hard to sniff out. Mm-hmm. That's a really strong heuristic. Like, who is dedicated and who's a tourist?
What's your opinion on anonymous actors and docs like yourself, you know, human beings versus caricatures, PFPs?
Yeah.
Any position at all?
I really wish everyone could be anonymous. I would much prefer to be anonymous, but the truth is that crypto is a dark forest, and there's a conviction and a courage that comes with putting your face on something. You know, in the olden days, in our grandparents' time, people used to put their own name on a company, because what they were saying is, I'm not gonna. This is my reputation I'm putting on the line.
Yeah. Right.
This is the Ford Motor Company. It's not, you know, Tesla's motor company. It's Ford.
Yeah.
Right. There was that was because, you know, it was a more Wild West time. We live in a Wild West time in cryptos. Yeah. So I think if people aren't putting their names behind something, they aren't putting their reputations behind something, their faces behind something, I get it. I get why they don't want to. Probably 50% of the time, it's perfectly legitimate reasons.
Yeah.
The 50% of the time, it's because they're a dark actor. And as a third party, I'm sorry, but the privilege of your anonymity is not something I need to pay for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, we've
wrestled with that too, because I think a lot of times, they're like you're saying, 50% of the time, anonymous actors are trying to build something unique and contribute, and they don't want to deal with the potential backlash of like, you know, forces from above, like repressing.
Like, look at what's happening with, you know, Hayden Adams over with Uniswap. You know, he's a face.
Yeah,
he's somebody that the government, the force of the government, can go after, right? To paint a picture, whatever their end game agenda is. They're not going to go after, you know, these anonymous founders, because they cannot. Right?
Yeah.
So that is the risk, and like you said, that is like a point of courage, I think, that is being displayed in this Web3 space, right? And to me, automatically just lends so much credibility and specifically towards what you guys are doing, not just with, you know, the background of your organic origin story. And we ask ourselves this question too, like, what is that outstanding accolade, like I guess an L2 contributor can kind of have? And for sure, presence before all of the hype and mania activity is definitely the biggest one, right? So that led us to Stacks. It's definitely, you guys are in the same camp as far as like genuine contribution. But yeah, just to kind of like progress the conversation forward a little bit. You guys, so you have Bitmap OS in development, which is, I would like to hear a little bit more of.
Bitcoin OS, not Bitmap.
Sorry, Bitcoin OS.
We're developing Bitmap OS, but yeah.
Yeah, so there's an interplay there. Yeah. Bitcoin OS, but now you guys have like a big opportunity, right? Like runes are coming. Obviously, Bitcoin is going to be congested to the brim of possibility. So now you have this opportunity to showcase what it is you offer as a protocol standard, whatever sidechain environment, leading up to kind of convincing developers you need to leverage this operating system stack to kind of deploy this how you see fit, right? So what is going to be ready post the halving block as far as showcasing all this technology?
Well, we're going to be introducing our DevNet soon. Our goal is to roll out our rollup over the course of coming months.
Yeah.
Before, basically by around August, we expect to have a system close to what we would like to, close to what we would consider V1.
Okay. But any of the existing protocols that are based on rootstock, is there going to be any way to bridge, like maybe even BRC20s or Rune tokens over into those ecosystems?
Yeah, that so definitely. So the ability to start using runes on Sovryn is going to be available from the moment that runes launches.
Okay, wow.
Nice.
Our goal is to provide the most decentralized, most efficient, most low cost, most user-friendly experience for people who are trading runes. Because first of all, we think that runes are going to be one of, if not the primary token standard for Bitcoin. We think that that's an extremely important market and we want to develop it. And sort of a central thesis of Sovryn, like one of our main mottos, is you shouldn't have to be technical in order to be free. And so we want to make this so easy that anyone can use it.
So final question for you is what heuristic, what technical marketing out there that you see that is obviously not conducive to moving the ball forward for Bitcoin? Like, what is it like? If a project spawns out of thin air and they're saying, "Send me your assets," and it's a multi-sig, is that like a signal to you? Is like that is not the way to do it. So, what other things have you seen? Something like that.
Well, look, I mean, there's a number of projects out there who are claiming to be Bitcoin layer 2s and live now that they're not. I think Stacks are good actors, but I mean, the degree to which Stacks is a layer 2 on Bitcoin is completely oversold. It doesn't have secure Bitcoin security. It's not secured by Bitcoin proof of work. It doesn't use BTC as its core asset. In fact, you can't even get BTC onto it, really. It's very, very little actual BTC on Stacks. And Stacks, I think, is one of the best actors and most actually affiliated, developing, credible teams out there. Right? So most of the projects out there who are saying we've already done this, they're way worse. So you can just look around at those projects, and see these what in what way are you using BTC? In what way are you using Bitcoin proof of work security?
Right.
You're probably not.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's a good answer because
I'll give you an example.
Sure.
Right, like this DeFi chain. I don't know if people are familiar with DeFi chain, but DeFi chain were claiming to be, a Bitcoin chain. There wasn't any Bitcoin on it. It was all synthetic BTC. So, there's a million projects out there. I haven't studied all of them. But it's hard to identify who's not, which projects are terrible, because maybe these projects could improve. What I can tell you is which are the good projects, right? So there's projects that are really trying. Rootstock, Stacks, Bob, Meso. These are the current crop of, I think, some of the best platform projects. There's Sovryn, Alex, Babelfish, and a few other Bitcoin projects, sort of more on the application level, or like Sovryn building infrastructure. And there are a bunch of projects that are building the infrastructure of tomorrow. It's harder to identify those right now. I think Sovryn, I'm biased, obviously, but I think it's one of the strongest contenders. And those I think are the best paragons we have.
Yes.
Right now within the industry.
And you do have an ERC20 token, if I'm not mistaken, right? With Sovryn. Are there any plans?
There's a token. Yeah, so there's a token, and it's been bridged over to Ethereum. So there's an ERC20 version of it, which is tradable on Uniswap and on a number of centralized exchanges, but mostly on Sovryn. It's like the deepest liquidity is on Sovryn.
Okay, got you. Okay, excellent. So the rollups are targeted for like Q4, roughly end of Q3, something like that, right? So it's something our audience has something to look.
Yeah. Timing exactly when it will come is difficult.
I understand.
Whenever you're doing deep R&D, but this year we've set our. We've planted our flag on the hill of this year.
Okay, great. No, that's going to be one of our major. I mean, obviously, we got to get through runes, right?
Yeah.
Got to get through other experimental forces, kind of like emerging from this ordinal space, which are going to have their time to shine. Things that we're working on ourselves around this like digital matter theory narrative, non-arbitrary tokens, and such. These are going to be the things that can be like immediately supported by the layer one ecosystem of Bitcoin, right? But at some point, probably towards the end of the year, this feels very much like how Ethereum kind of happened last cycle. It's like after DeFi happened, after NFTs kind of blew up.
Yeah.
And then the conversation was like, all right, the L2 actors, which ones are actually going to onboard liquidity and users and stuff. And Polygon kind of took its shape and form. And then, the other ecosystem entrants like Avalanche and, Arbitrum, they started to fall in place. So, yeah. It's good to know.
This is why I say Bitcoin is going to speed run the process Ethereum went through. Right?
Feels like it.
Yeah.
Ethereum, sort of 2015 got CryptoKitties, 2016 ICOs, 2020 DeFi, 2021 first rollups.
Okay,
right.
Interesting.
Bitcoin is going to do that process in about 2 years.
Interesting. Wow.
Dang.
All of it.
Yeah.
That's going to be one hell of
quite the show.
I'm glad we have front row seats to it all.
Are you not entertained?
Pretty much. Can't get any better than this. So, because from my perspective, a couple of years ago, I did not find any entertainment value in Bitcoin, to be honest. Will was all
wrong.
I know.
I was all in Bitcoin.
Right, but this whole new development space is like I'm all in now too.
Yeah,
right? And I'm willing to die on that hill with you against the Ethereum maxis. So
finally,
we're gonna go to war, dude.
Too bad,
TJ. We're officially enemies. How do you feel about that?
We'll see.
It's okay.
All right, Edan.
TJ, there's still a lot of value in Ethereum. It's fine. You still got time.
You're fine.
I hope
TJ.
so. My back depends on it.
You still got time.
You can bridge out anytime you want, TJ.
Yeah.
All right, Edan. Thank you so much for your time, man. This has been a pleasure talking to you about Sovryn and the whole Bitcoin ecosystem. And we know kind of where everything is going with Bitcoin with ordinals, and we have rootstock technology. We have all these like capabilities for us to build out what we think is going to manifest into like the multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem. Final question: where do you predict the price for Bitcoin for this cycle is going to be? All-time high.
Even though he told you not to think about that. He told you not to think about that.
I'm not a trader. I build stuff and I have a long-term view. It's going to be higher, much higher than where it is right now.
Okay. All right. We'll end it there.
You don't pay attention to the rainbow charts.
Yeah, no rainbow charts for Edan.
No, none of that.
No, I'll take a look like everyone else when I'm, sitting on the toilet trying. I wonder when it hits $1 million. But I don't give them any credence.
Yeah. Same.
Okay, cool. All right, Edan, thank you so much for talking. All the links will be in the description, and I appreciate you guys for watching. And we will catch you in the next podcast.
Peace.